What Call Me By Your Name did for peaches, the SafeKeep does for pears. Recently, I read this book with my online book club, and we've been having so many great discussions about it. And I do love a good historically set novel that has lots of twists and turns in its plot. So I found this pleasurable and moving to read, especially because the story has multiple levels to it. It's a creepy tale with almost gothic, Rebecca-esque undertones about the claustrophobia of being in a house with someone you resent and feel a growing animosity towards. It's about sexual repression and the transformative experience when all of that pent-up desire is released. And it's about the weight of history, the calamitous after effects of war, and how to reconcile what has been lost and displaced. Now, there are a number of reveals in this story, so I'll do my best to avoid giving any spoilers, and when I do go into spoiler territory, I'll signpost that so you can stop watching in case you haven't read this book yet. The novel initially centers around Isabel, who seemingly has little motivation other than maintaining her deceased mother's house and all of its contents. It's the 1960s, and Isabel lives a severely self-contained existence in a rural Dutch province. And Isabel is a real piece of work. She is nasty and rude to almost everyone she meets, but I do think there's a humor and pleasure about reading a character who so unapologetically brushes aside all social conventions, because she is someone that I would never want to meet in real life, but it is fun reading about someone who is so dismissive towards everyone. I did feel that this became somewhat repetitive in the first section of the novel, but overall she's a compellingly unlikable character. Isabel fiercely guards the house and its contents and finds it difficult to keep a maid because she continuously lashes out at them with judgments and accusations. However, Isabel is little more than a caretaker for this building because it belongs to her uncle and it will pass on to her older brother Louis when their uncle passes. I liked how small details about her family life and the contents of this house are dropped into this first section of the novel, hinting at a larger story and adding to the complexity of her character. Other than with the maid, the most regular human contact she has is with her younger brother, Hendrik, who has a teasing rapport with his uptight sister. And Hendrik has lived away from this location ever since coming out to their mother, who is now deceased. But Isabel studiously ignored the reality and reasons behind his leaving. And there's a line early on in the book when it says, "She could sometimes blur her eyes when looking at something, decide not to see it in full focus, decide to disengage." And I think this line is quite significant and says something much larger about her character, how Isabel uses self-denial when it comes to things that are emotionally difficult, both internally and externally. Near the beginning, there's a scene which sets this novel's plot into motion. Isabel's older brother, Louis, invites his siblings, Isabel and Hendrik, to a dinner to meet his new girlfriend, Ava. And interestingly, the author has described in interviews how she first wrote this scene as a short story. So there's all the tension of the new girlfriend wanting to make a good impression and get to know her partner's adult siblings, and in return, Isabel and Hendrik are very dismissive towards her because they see her as only the latest squeeze because their older brother is a notorious womanizer. But there is a difference with Ava because Louis needs to travel with work, so he informs Isabel that Ava will be staying with her in her carefully guarded home. And of course, Isabel is vehemently against this plan, but she's not given a choice. So when rambunctious Ava moves into the family home, it is like she is entering a powder keg that is ready to explode. It's interesting how the house is like the central character of this novel, and a number of members of my book club have remarked upon this. It's the SafeKeep that contains a number of possessions that have a lot of meaning, and it's witnessed a lot of events and people who have passed through it over the years. And I do enjoy novels like The Dutch House by Anne Patchett, or Northwoods by Daniel Mason, or indeed Rebecca, where the house itself is like a protagonist that possesses emotion and memory. We're shown how the SafeKeep has persisted throughout World War II and maintains a lot of secrets from both the personal lives of these characters and larger historical events. So I was initially fascinated by the character of Isabel, who possesses a fierce determination to remain independent. And all the small glimpses of her early family life and details strewn throughout the abode were intriguing and made me wonder what was the real story behind both Isabel's life and this house. It also builds a highly pressurized and stifling atmosphere where something eventually has to break. But I must say, I never got a full sense of why Isabel was the way she was and why she was so attached to this house and all of its contents. I mean, I know she was charged by her mother before the mother died to maintain the house, and Isabel herself is extremely repressed, but at the same time I didn't understand why she didn't ever leave or try to make anything else of her life. And as the full story was revealed, this came to feel more like a plot device than something that would naturally occur in a person's life. Now I'm going to get into some spoilers, so feel free to stop watching if you haven't read this novel yet, because I do want to talk about some of the things that are revealed, and especially about the ending, which a lot of readers have been debating about. I did feel like the amorous affair and sexual obsession that develops between Isabel and Ava in the second part of the book was well done. I mean, it's difficult to write about scenes that are, really sexy and steamy while not feeling gratuitous. And I feel like the author did a good job of balancing those things and, showing just enough, going into just enough descriptive detail to really feel all of that passion, but not to go completely overboard with it. But I have to say, where I became most gripped is in the third part of the book, when Ava's backstory unfolds, because it gives real insight into the attitudes towards Jewish people, both in the Netherlands and Europe as a whole during World War II and its aftermath. I was really endeared towards Ava, who comes across like a canny individual that was just trying to survive. And I like that the author uses the form of diaries, so we just get little bits and pieces of information about this just through this very personal lens. I'm not trying to give a comprehensive history, because that's not the point of a novel and a story, but we really get a sense of the desperation that she felt and difficulty she had in continuing on living, but also how and why she would be so determined to regain possession of this house and its contents. Because she understands that there will never be any true compensation or justice for her family or other people who were displaced or killed during the war. So I really enjoyed this novel overall, but I felt most engaged by this third section because of its engagement with history and how it shows what was really at stake for these two characters who cohabited in the SafeKeep. I know many readers have been debating about whether the very end of the SafeKeep is too saccharine, and I have to say I guessed before their affair even started how this novel was going to end, because I know the author is a big fan of Sarah Waters' Fingersmith, and anyone who has read this book, I think, can see the influence upon the SafeKeep. And I feel like this works slightly to the disadvantage of the SafeKeep, because I couldn't help comparing these two books and feeling like Sarah Waters creates a much bigger and more impressive yarn of a tale. But obviously they're set in very different time periods and in different contexts and are doing slightly different things. So maybe that's not fair. But I feel like I really could feel the presence of Sarah Waters upon this author's writing. So the ending certainly didn't surprise me, but I think the author does a good job at showing how their union is hard-won. There's naturally a lot of mistrust and animosity between them because of their respective pasts and the lack of transparency throughout their affair. Though they weren't truthful about their motives, the passion between them is true, and this allows them to overcome the burden of the past. So I think the conclusion is justified, and since so many queer stories in literature end tragically, it feels nice that this ends happily, or at least hopefully. I read a lot of fiction that has tragic endings or ambivalent endings, so it's sweet for a change to have an ending that is quite positive. And I don't think the ending is the real point of this novel. It's more about the tension and the build-up of their relationship over time, but also about the social attitudes and political workings of a nation in the aftermath of war. I also really appreciated Hendrik as a character, and the scene where he and his partner Sebastian come to stay at the house. This really loosened up Isabel as a character and gave some much needed relief, because her life with Ava was so stifling. I found it really moving learning about the conflict of an early affair that Hendrik has with a teacher, and how he left the family home to live honestly as a gay man. And the relationship between Hendrik and Isabel was really compelling and shows how there are different kinds of queer experiences and different ways of coming out, because Isabel wasn't able to admit, I think even to herself for quite a long time, that she has same-sex desires. And it's really interesting later in the novel when Isabel has an opportunity to admit to Hendrik of how she feels and that she is also like him. She doesn't do so, but she does admit this to Louis, partly because she wants to be given the family home. But it's so intriguing how she keeps this from Hendrik, and in a way I wish there was more about Hendrik and Sebastian's story in this book, but I know that really isn't the point of the novel, and it's really all about Isabel and Ava, and I think that's quite right that the author made that decision. If you've not seen it already, I'd really suggest reading an essay by Van Der Wouden from several years ago called On Not Reading Anne Frank, and I'll put a link to it in the description below, because it's so interesting how it gets into the author's past and history, and about underlying conflicts and simmering tensions that she's experienced in her own life, which I feel like have fed into the story of this novel. But if you've read The SafeKeep, I would love to hear what you think about the novel overall. Did you think it was effective, all of the reveals in the story? Did you enjoy that Isabel was such a difficult character, or did you find it hard to read about her because she was so unlikable a lot of the time? And what do you think about the ending? Did you enjoy it, or did you feel like it was a letdown? Please let me know about all of that in the comments below. I'd love to hear your point of view, but I hope you're doing well and reading good things, and I will speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.